It is a great honor and a privilege to introduce Dr. Jaques Brosh. We're here in your beautiful apartment in Netanya in Israel. And Jaques, you came from Vienna and you were one of the last trains to leave Vienna before the Second World War.
No, we actually left, I was born in Vienna, yes. And we actually left Vienna on the last train, the very last train to leave Vienna. On the 30th of August or something like that.
In 1939?
And we arrived in England the day before the war broke out. We left it a bit late.
And when were you born?
Well, I was born in 1931. 4th of July, American Independence Day.
And your parents and grandparents, where did they come from?
Yeah, my father was born in Vienna. I think my grandfather was also born in Vienna. My mother she was born in Bratislava. And they came to Vienna. I don't know how they came to Vienna, but they came. And so I'll tell you a little bit about my father. Because there's a lot of my father was born in Vienna. His father had been an officer, well, not actually an officer, a senior sergeant major, because at the time when my grandfather, I never met him, was in the army. The Jews were only allowed to, up to that height. No officer at that time. That was the highest that any Jew could have taken. And in fact, we're going to have a beautiful discharge. I think my daughter, the beautiful discharge certificate on material. It's about that size, telling exactly in Hungarian and in German. And it's a lovely material. That was weighing about 1901, 1902. My father was born in that's a long time ago, 1897. And he's brought up in Vienna. He went to school there. He was about to enter university to do medicine when what's his name was assassinated, which set off the First World War.
Franz Joseph.
And it came to 1916. My father was with us at 17. He was 17, all ready to enter school, but being lost at that time, he decided he wanted to go join the army. So he went along, gave him a wrong date of birth, told him he was a year older than he was, forgot about his medical students, and joined the army. He became a lieutenant colonel, and he was taken prisoner, as one big bottle he was taken prisoner, and he was sent to Irkutsk prisoners' war camp, which I don't know if you know, it's in the middle, point in the middle of Siberia. I once read a book about that, about Irkutsk, and somebody who escaped from Irkutsk and walked all the way to India. It's up in the middle. And he was there in that camp. He had a friend. He actually made, he was a very keen chess player. He made a chess set out of stale bread. And then the revolution came, revolution. He saw it. He was in the camp. Being an officer, they had more privileges and he was allowed to leave the camp. He watched it, he watched what happened there. And he and his friend decided that they'd go off and leave the camp. There was a bit of chaos there at the time, so it was easy to do it. But the two of them went off, and they had to get to Moscow. Now the only way you could travel it was a long way. You had to get, describe music, but it's true that you had to get paper. Well, there were all a lot of peasants now who were in charge, who were very illiterate. So they befriended, the two of them befriended the station master's daughter, became very friendly, and she gave a piece of paper that had a official stamp on it. And that took them to Moscow, because nobody could even show the paper that's official. He watched the he watched, they saw the massacre, what, I forgot the date, 17, what, I think it was the September massacre, wasn't it? He and his friend, from an attic in a room, they looked straight down on top of it, and they saw it. And he decided then that he would join the Reds. He became an instructor in the Red Army's Cavalry Officers Cavalry Training Institute in Tashkent. In fact, Eddie Marcus always got hit by a horse. I didn't know how to learn to ride a horse, and he became an officer. Anyway, a few years later, after that, he decided it was time to come home. And I think the Austrian ambassador was visiting Moscow, so they made their way there, and they decided to come home. Met my mother and got married, and that's going to be very relevant, actually. Now, let's go back to my life. The big event, of course, when Hitler annexed Austria. I think my father got a photograph of him marching through the street. And that's when everything started then in Vienna. They were very anti-Semitic. Well, there was such a lot of Jewish people in Vienna. You know, about 200,000 lived in Vienna at that time. And my father had a trade. They had a shop selling perfumery. My father could actually he had a book about how to make perfumes, different perfumes, and he was very good at it. He also had a job selling perfume for another firm. And when all the trouble started, to jump a little, I found a certificate, a letter the other day, in 19 from Sancho, given from employers, that he was a very good employer, there was nothing to complain about. They were not Jewish, but it said, he's one of the best employers. And it's a very nice letter. And funny enough, I only came across it the other day. And a few recommendations like that. Okay, you know what happened. Let's go to the Crystal Nacht. We were sitting in our apartment. We knew you couldn't leave the apartment. We knew that something was going on. And eventually, the expected knock on the door came, the banging on the door came. I was sent to the other room. I left the door open, and 6 Gestapo, not Gestapo, the SA stood there. So they just walked in, and they looked around, and okay, we'll take that, which happened to be my father's prized possession, his radio. He always valued radios because in those days, communication over the world wasn't, and he loved to be able to turn the knob and get in touch with all over the world. He always did, and yes, so they took that. Didn't take it. I don't think they took it. They looked everywhere. Didn't take anything else, except they took my father. That was a night that in Austria and in Vienna, they already had a list of all the Jewish people where they lived. They arrested one Jewish person from every family, and a lot of them were sent to Dachau. We don't know where they took him. He was taken away. We tried to make inquiries. Someone said he might be at the school. We eventually found out that he was at a school which was used to keep people not far away from us. And I think my mother went there, and I'm not so sure now whether she saw him from the window. And he was kept there. They took my auntie as well, but she, being a very attractive young lady, she talked her way out of being kept by them. My own two uncles who had heard about this, so they went into hiding before they came. He was there for about 3 weeks. I think it was about 10 days or 2 weeks before we found out where he was. And he was released on certain conditions. We had him, it's a big story, we had visas to go to China, a lot of Jewish people went to China. Very interesting. Jewish community, still a centre there, showed you where the Jewish people lived even to this day. We had visas to go, but they just let him come out on the condition that he left the country within 3 months. So, comes in, ready to go. What happens? Russia stopped giving transit visas, closed its door to transit visas. You couldn't get to China any other way than that. Impossible. So I remember him going to Berlin to see what he could do. That was a long trip from Vienna in those days. By the way, when he came out of the place where they kept him, he said the conditions were terrible. They were treated terribly, even in those days. People would be on the fourth floor committing suicide. They had to stand out. It was in November, it was icy cold, to stand all night one night outside in the. It said it was terrible. That's just one or two of the things that I remember this told us. Anyway, then of course, then came what they called the Fuji Plan, where this Japanese ambassador in Russia, in Latvia, I think in Latvia, started issuing transit visas. He was given, and he's buried in the forest of the Reichs here. He gave about 2,000 visas to the Jews.
Sugihara, the Japanese consul
general. There's a book about this. And anyway, so we started looking elsewhere. I already had family in Israel. We had family in England. And we're looking. But to go to any of these places, you had to have a work permit. I had family in China who'd been, and they had actually got the work permit. They'd not been there about a year, but they managed to get the work permit, which they couldn't use. So I had family in Israel who'd been here since 1936. Cousin actually, from that family, very famous, he became a major general here. Kalman Magen played a big part in the Suez, not in the Suez War, in the Yom Kippur War, charge of the commander of the armored forces in Sinai, and anyway, so I started looking elsewhere.
Can I just ask you, Jacques, before, can you show the picture of your family?
Yeah. This was taken just before we went to Vienna.
This is before you left Vienna?
Yeah. Those are my parents, myself, and 2 sisters.
And how old were your sisters?
I'm going to tell you. One was 6 years older than me, one was 9 years older than me.
And this is the Broch family. And if you could just tell us a little bit, were you brought up in a religious home?
No. My mother was more religious than my father. At that time, he'd been communist, been all over the world. My mother came from Bratislava, and that family was more religious than anything.
Did you go to a Jewish primary school growing up in Vienna?
Sorry?
Did you go to a Jewish primary school? The school you went to, was it a Jewish school?
I went to a Jewish club. I remember it around the corner from where I lived. I can't remember the name of it. It was a Jewish, for young children. Went there.
And were you in the Jewish district?
In fact, the night after the Kristallnacht, we went, I think it must have been Tuesday, we used to go to that night, so we went to walk past the shul, which had burned, all the books were still burning outside it.
So could you tell us a little bit about...
Actually, I've got a photograph of all my class, my group, and from that place.
So, Jacques, could you tell us a bit more about the Kristallnacht? What do you remember?
I wasn't allowed to look out. I mean, I could see on that night, next day, I could see people scrubbing the street, and so.
They made the Jews scrub the street.
Scrub the Jews, people standing around cheering them. I could see it just below our window. and the street there wasn't very nice.
And did you feel the anti-Semitism? Could you feel that there was a tremendous anti-Semitism?
Yes.
When you walked in the streets, could you feel it?
I watched it. I wasn't allowed to go. My mother could actually go out because she was fairish, and so she could walk through the streets, and so was one of my sisters. But now let me, before I lose my subject, let me get on. So eventually my parents, this is also very interesting, my parents got a visa, works visa for England. But once you have your visa, you can go. I mean, they got, yes, they got, but in the passport, it said, without Jack. Then my sisters had already were older than me, they had their own passport. And then it particularly said, without Jack. And we're waiting, so we're waiting for my sisters, and the queues outside the British Embassy, as the American Embassy. I mean, they went down, you had to queue for days, not hours, like here. You had to queue for days. And so somebody said to my parents, this absolutely, why don't you, to my mother, why don't you write to the Queen of England? You tell her you've got 2 daughters, she's got 2 daughters, tell her what's happening. Within 1 week, my sisters were called for the medical. And they got to the embassy, they went there, yes, who do you know? What protection have you got? How come because people are queuing for months. And you say to us, we never got an answer to the letter, not a written reply. But it just shows it's very interesting. So, once you've had your interview, once you had your medical then, your visa followed automatically within a week. 10 days per week. So my parents decided, things were getting very bad. My sisters were older, they had their own passports already. They were older than me. That we would go ahead and they would follow a few days later. Well, as I told you, ours was the last train to leave. They survived. They did survive. But anyway, and that's how I left with my parents. They took me, and we had an aunt and a grandmother still lived in Vienna, and another cousin. So they weren't on their own. There was quite a family there, and we went, and we got to the border between Germany and Holland at Cologne. I can remember this vividly. I was 18 years old. I was sitting in the corner, and they stopped everybody. In fact, I had a book about this reason, how they came out. The old master brought and inspected everybody's passport, one person, very, very efficient. They were very efficient in all that. They came in, took my father's passport and says, who's he? My father went, that's my son. He says, but I've got that passport here. He said, it says in here, without Jack. You can't take him. He said, well, I can't leave him. It's my son, he's only a little boy. He said, no, you can't. What will happen if you go to England and they don't let you in? I can remember this. This is actually, he says, I will have to see about that. He said, no, you can't. I'll have to go and see my officer. Goes off, comes back, Falcon marches into the carriage there. Heil Hitler, what's going on, what's happening? He's looking. Ask him again, who's he? He says in here, without Jack, and he's looking at the passport. And look, he says to my father, I see that you were an officer in the Austrian army in the First World War. So my father said, that's correct. He said, well, I am also an officer. As one off in the army, and as one officer to the other, I wish you good luck. Yeah. Now it shows, it's almost beschert that he didn't do his medical student and he joined the army. That was, as one officer, another officer, I wish you good luck, Heil Hitler. And he went on.
Why did they put in the passport without Jack? Why did they do that?
Because my parents had had the works permit. My parents had the works permit, that's all. I mean, we were all graduates. I remember we had to report to the Gestapo one time, including myself. We had to go to the office, and we had to sign things, because they added a name to all the women, Jewish women, who had it. Sarah was actually the name. And what did that? Don't think that did she make a lot already, Yaakov, I don't know.
Israel. It was Israel.
Yeah.
They added Israel.
And I had to sign something there. I was 7 years old, 7, 8 years. And I always used to write with my tongue out. And the thing was terrifying. So this officer said to me, if you don't put your tongue in, I'll cut it off. But the way things were, I thought it meant it. I'm terrified. And one day my father had to report, and another person there, exactly the same name, Paul Broch, born the same date. And they didn't want my father, wanted the other. That was a coincidence. Anyway, so we arrived in England. And
can I ask, when you left and you had to leave your sisters behind, it must have been a bit of a trauma.
No, they were supposed to follow within a few days. They'd already had the medical. Once they had the medical at the embassy, your visa comes automatically within a week.
So you thought they were going to follow you soon?
Yes, it was ready. Everything was ready for them.
And what happened when your parents found out that there are no more trains?
Sorry?
When they found out that yours was the last train, they must have been devastated.
But if we didn't find out till we got to England a few days later, there was no more trains.
Your parents must have been besides themselves. They must have been devastated.
Yeah, well, yes, nobody imagined what would happen after that. I mean, you couldn't imagine at the time. As I say, my grandmother was still there. Cousins were there. We had one auntie who, fortunately, I'd say, had married out, so she had more freedom. She survived altogether, living there with the husband. So they were not left exactly on their own.
And what happened to your sisters?
So, I must say I don't know very much. I mean, they survived, and one of them had somebody from the camps, and they emigrated to Canada, and the other one met somebody who was found in Vienna afterwards. And one actually worked. The other one worked. The younger one, the fair one was more fair. She could work. Didn't look at all. Yeah, she could go out. She didn't look at all, particularly she could go out. She was dark, and she's more Jewish, you see. So, and she worked for a Jewish dentist, the older one, till I think, from what I hear, till 1941, 42, and then he disappeared, and that was the end of her job. They hid away. They were arrested one time and spent 3 months in one of the prisons there before being released, and that's all. By the way, I must tell you, when the Gestapo came to the Kristallnacht, I only heard this. Being a little boy, they didn't tell me I was eavesdropping, and the fellow that was their leader happened to be our next door neighbour. And I heard him say, it would have been a lot worse for you if I hadn't come, if it hadn't been me. Who knows? He says, it just said it was our friend from neighbour. It would have been a lot worse for you if it hadn't been me. So that's it. So who knows? Who knows what's good and bad?
So from Cologne, do you remember what happened from Cologne when you got to the border with Cologne?
With that officer.
But now you were going to England. Do you remember?
We were on the way to England from Rotterdam, from the Hook of Holland anyway, to Harwich. And I was just reading in a paper last week that in Harwich, where this boat used to land, the kinder transport landed there as well. Must have been about the same day, something like that. And they're going to put a monument at Harwich to the port where they all landed. I just read it in the paper the other day, last week, in England. You're always putting up monuments somewhere.
And you remember the trip, going on the ship, you remember?
I was excited on the boat. I was standing out looking for England till we saw it. I mean, I was very excited about it. And when I came to England, my parents, we went to a place, assembly place in London, where the I think it was Bloomsbury House. All the Jewish arrivals came there, got processed about saying, and they sent us up to Leeds, where I already had an uncle that lived there, one of the two that got out without being arrested, and my grandmother. And my parents had to go and work in a very fine big mansion just outside York, about 20 miles from Leeds, and I went to live in a hostel. In Leeds, it's quite a well-known hostel, they call it the hostel. I don't know how many of them. I was one of the youngest. I was the second youngest there. I don't know how many people were there, and my parents had very, very nice employers where they worked. My father was a general maintenance man, whatever you call it. My mother was a housekeeper and a cook. She was a very good cook. She made them chicken soup on a Friday night, the first night she was there. I said, what's this? She said, in England, they only ate chicken soup when somebody was ill. That was the thing. And they said, nobody's in here. But they got really used to having chicken soup on Friday night after that. And strange enough, actually, their business, their big business, shops all over Yorkshire, all the big towns. They have to have been the biggest pork butchers in Yorkshire. But sometimes people were not, they were treated very nicely. So much so that this family came to see them every Christmas, before Christmas, and brought them some Christmas presents. Not a lot of pork, but chocolates or whatever it was, every year for years after. And so I once wrote a letter into the Jewish HAR Association Jewish Refugees magazine, because somebody was complaining that they were very, very badly treated by the people who took advantage of them. So they were not, so I wrote it not like that. My parents were very nice, they really respected them, and as I say, they liked them so much. Every year, if not, probably twice a year, they came to see how they were getting on. It was very nice of them. It was a nice place. I remember I went out for once or twice for a shop out for a weekend. It was a big estate that they had there. And that's it. I lived in this hostel. I remember the hostel. The worst day of my day, one of the worst days that I had, was when my father came along while I was still in the hostel with a policeman to say he had to go away because the Jewish people, the Brits were interning all enemy aliens, Jewish or Nazi. They didn't differentiate them. And as far as you came from Vienna or Germany, you were an enemy alien. They didn't take my brother, actually, they took my father. And he had to go to the Isle of, he was interned to the Isle of Man. I don't know if you know, but that's it. And he seemed to have this survival instinct in him, because he told us they were all lined up, and somebody said, "Can anybody here cook?" So my father said, "Well, if I'm a cook, I won't starve." Yes, I'm a cook, and he became the cook there. And he was there for about 6 months, I think. Anyway, I mean, we could correspond then, but there was a lot of trouble between the Nazis, enemy aliens, and the Jewish enemies, which I didn't realise till a long time later, that there was a lot of trouble between them and in the camps as well. They didn't differentiate between either. So, until later on. And then my father came home and he had to go and work in a munitions factory. You could have, and some of them joined the army there, and some went to do commissions working. And that's basically what happened.
Can I ask, were your parents in touch with your sisters? Was there any communication with your parents and your sisters that were still in Vienna?
The Red Cross let us during the early part of the war. They were warned, you've got to stop this, because they found out that the Nazis were using this to put pressure on people, threatening them, like in England, to do espionage. So certainly if you don't, your family will suffer there. So we had to stop the correspondence then. That was it.
And Jaques, when did you...
And then after, we didn't pick up again until after the war.
When did you see your sisters again? When did you see your sisters again?
After the war.
Did they come and visit you?
No, my father and his brother went over there first. They went to straight after the war to see them. And then there was some nasty stories as well about some Jewish people going home and finding people living in their apartment. One fellow took the Nazis, threw him out of the window.
Really?
Well, after what they'd gone through and everything, yeah. But they were very unhappy when they came back. In fact, I think they left a few days early. They'd seen their children and could see what's going on and they could see what plans they can make. And then I think they were already getting married. So they were already in their 20s. So they stayed there with their husbands until one went to Canada.
And when did you get to see, and your mother, when did your mother and you see your sisters?
I thought, when we got to see them, they came to visit us once or twice, and later on from Canada as well.
Did you have a closeness, or did the war...
Yes, I'm still in touch with my niece and nephews.
But with your sisters, did you still have a closeness?
The children from my sister's children.
But your sisters themselves?
They both died.
But did you have a closeness growing up, or...
Did I have cousins?
Were you close with your sisters? Did you feel a closeness, a bond?
Yeah. One fellow from my family left in 1936. The mother cousins left in 1938. I remember one day I was the youngest in the family. the youngest. It was quite a big family. Left in 1938. I do remember when you see what's going on with the Palestinians. I do remember coming home going to visit my cousin and see that there's something going on, and then they were all throwing stones at the Nazis. So I joined in, and I started throwing stones at them. Hitler used a whole group of them, and then they turned and started change, and we ran like mad. I didn't know what was going on. I'd throw my stone, come on, my cousin said, come on, and then we had to run like hell because they came out chasing us. So that's where I learned to run. I became quite a good sportsman after that.
And Jaques, when you were growing up, did you experience a lot of anti-Semitism when you were walking on the streets in Vienna?
Yes, wait a minute, I must say, all the Jewish children had to leave the school where I was. One school was dedicated and all the Jewish children had to go there. The place called the Kastersgasse. I went and visited it. Twice I should have been there to Vienna and I visited. And so I had to change everything around this Jewish school. I was quite happy at the Jewish school, as far as I can remember. In fact, I met a lady here, she's died now unfortunately, who was at the same school, my age. I met in England already, and she left 3 weeks before me. But she had a very good memory. She could remember the names of every teacher. I've got some photographs, but I think not a lot of the school now. And she remembered the name of every teacher but I've got all my school reports. And I met her here. And I knew her very well, but I didn't know this until years later. We remember talking. Which school did you go? Where did you go to? Well, I was there at the same time.
And Jaques, what happened to your grandmother that was left in Vienna? Your grandmother that was left in Vienna, what happened to her?
Yes.
Your grandmother in Vienna, what happened to her? Your grandmother?
Oh, my grandmother. No, she's dead and she died. And one of my mother's sisters who was not married, and she unfortunately died in Auschwitz.
She died in Auschwitz?
Yeah, unfortunately, and a terrible circumstance when you found that out. We got that from the very specific documents that the Nazis used to keep. I think my grandmother died of Nazi starvation or whatever it was.
She was also sent. She was sent to the camps.
We actually found the grave when we went over. I took my children over to visit, and we found the grave of my grandmother there. And the grave of my grandfather as well. This happened, but I never knew him. I never knew either my grandparents, grandfathers. I knew both my grandmothers. What else can I just tell you?
So Jaques, can I just ask you, it's a difficult question, but after the war, when you met your sisters again, your two sisters, after the war, did you feel a bond because you'd been separated?
Oh, yeah.
You did?
Yeah.
And your mother, she reconnected with her daughters?
No,
your mother was close to her daughters?
Yes. We never lost the bond. I mean, you can't forget your sisters. I mean, you never did.
But you were close.
We kept visiting each other. Came to England. We went there. Especially my father, my parents. He went to visit them in Canada a few times, quite regularly, and in Vienna. I don't think they were happy about going to Vienna about it. But so that's the way it was. And
how did you feel when you personally went back to Vienna? Was it very difficult to go back?
The first time I went, I didn't go. Interesting. We decided to go on a day trip from England. The first day trips to different places in the world, and they're very good. We only lived a quarter of an hour away from the airport in Leeds, we were living. And there was a day trip from Leeds to Vienna. I think I left early in the morning and came back and had a whole day in Vienna. I said, so why do we go? So one of my daughters who lived in Manchester, the other two were living here already. Dad, can I come with you? I said, of course you can. Okay, so we booked to go with them. And I'd arranged to meet my sister there. So off we went, and it was very interesting, but I didn't like the feeling there. Once I could hear the accent, the way they were talking, it brought it all back.
All the memories.
And the hats, it brought it all back. So I wasn't all that happy there. My sister turned out very nice. They'd done very well there, so I was happy to see that. But I must say, I could remember everything. I can remember every single street.
The house that you grew up? Did you go visit the house?
So this was, we went to Vienna just before we came to Israel, 95 or something like that, in the last century. And we were driving in a taxi, my sister's car. I said, look, I've got a map of Vienna here, which they gave us on the plane. I know we live somewhere around here. If we were driving, if you go here and you turn right, it's where we used to live in Wintergasse, but I can't see the map. And she said, no, you don't. You're quite right, but they've changed the name to the Haslergasse.
And which district?
I knew that was in the 20th district. But I knew exactly where it was. I said, turned down the but they've changed the name, that's why I couldn't see it. And it brought back memories, but it's very unfortunate. It's a one thing that I hope I don't know about Corona. I don't like Corona either. But,
and Jacques, how do you feel that all the synagogues in the Kristallnacht, except for the main shul, the main synagogue, because it was in the courtyard?
Yeah, we had a very big shul, the Leopoldstrasse shul. I think that was the name of the shul. It's like the court. And it's quite a big shul.
They were destroyed.
That was destroyed.
They were all burnt. The one shul that remained, because if they would have destroyed that shul, they would have destroyed all the buildings surrounding it.
But the shul is still there now.
It's still there. I've been to it.
The
but how do you feel?
It has a list of names. My grandmother's name is on it. My sister's name. Some of my cousins who passed my age. We had 3 cousins my age. We were very, very close. Got a photograph of the student just before we left, and one of them, Charlie, whose brothers had already come on Aliyah. I don't know how come. Don't understand how he didn't come, because also his parents had come as well. He stayed with his grandmother, so I don't understand. And he apparently was arrested. I think he was taken to a camp way out of Vienna. He escaped. He must have been 13 at the time. He escaped, walked back to Vienna to my grandmother, got caught again, went to Theresienstadt. There was rather sort of a bad camp, but I think he actually died there. I don't know how. You can get that. You can get his sister from his brother in the Yad Vashem. That's all. That was them. The other one, incidentally, during 1938-39, my mother volunteered to work in the Jewish soup kitchen with my 2 aunts. I think it must have been a big demand at the time, it was huge. There had about 10 people working there. I've got photographs of that. And my mother with a group there. And while we were still there, they were working there. This aunt of mine, they had 7 children. Two had already gone to Israel, and they were had permits to come to Israel.
In those days, it was British Palestine.
Yeah, and they were going. You had to go to Romania and get a ship to Turkey. The ship went from there to Turkey, and they were booked to go on that. They didn't turn up. They didn't turn up in Turkey. We tried to get in touch with them from there. No, they're not on. I don't know what had happened. Somebody said they probably sold the passports and that was the end of them. I mean, they were shipped off to, I think, the fish up in Auschwitz, from what I gather. I read something about that ship the other day, the well-known ship, and that was them. And one of their daughters, she actually finished up in Israel. I don't know how. And I still have a postcard from her from Gan Shmuel. She was at the Gan Shmuel just up the road here, not far away from them. She was being 14 there. And the other 2 of my uncles settled in Haifa. And my cousins, they still live in, so the children still live in, what's her name? Kid. Named after the Czechoslovakian president.
Masaryk.
Far Masaryk, yeah, that's it. Yeah. And that's it.
And the family that gave the work permits or helped your parents obtain these work permits in England.
My parents?
Yeah. Was your family close? Were your parents close?
Oh yeah, we were a very close family. My mother had 5 sisters and a brother. In fact, there's only one brother, and they were very close family. Then they were spread out. 2 were in Israel. There's some in America. My father's sister went to China. They were the ones who sent us our work permits from China. And from there, they went to Australia. a lot of the Jewish people went to China, then went to Australia. We were actually in Australia one day, and funny enough, they had an exhibition which from the Jews from China, the refugees.
In Shanghai, there was a very big German and Austrian, especially Austrian community in Shanghai.
Yes.
There was a very big Jewish community in Shanghai.
And the people manning this exhibition were the people who had been in China.
Wow.
So,
and can I ask you, Jaques, when your father was on the Isle, when he was taken away, and he was,
Isle of Man here.
Isle of Man.
That was a terrible day for me.
Did Rabbi Schonfeld have any? Did your father have any dealings with Rabbi Schonfeld? With Rabbi Schonfeld, Rabbi Solomon Schonfeld. Did you remember the name, or did your father have any dealings with Rabbi Schonfeld? Because he helped a lot of bring food to the Isle of Man, and he did a lot of tremendous good work in helping the interns.
No, I didn't. No, that's what I haven't heard of it.
And
he and his two brothers went. The three of them there together in the Isle of Man. The two that had gone to hiding on the Kristallnacht. I don't know how they came to England in the first place, and him and they were all three in the Isle of Man together. And my life in the hostel was very nice. Yes, a nice group of people there. Leeds were a very good community with regards to helping refugees. They did a lot to get them work permits. That's the place, and Leeds is a place, I don't know if you know about Leeds, that's where Burton the tailors were huge tailors. In fact, the Burton family still live there. You got to know them. And my auntie went in, my mother's sister went into domestic service in the south of England. Now this is very interesting because she did an English when she came. She finished up not much later the crosswords, making crosswords for one of the English papers, daily papers. And I said, how did he come to do that? compiling crosswords for the papers. And so she came about doing that.
And Jaques, how does it feel? How does it feel knowing that you were literally on the last train out of Vienna?
Yeah,
it must be the most amazing.
We had no idea it was going to be the last train. I mean, it was actually the last train. I don't know what could have done if, because my sisters were supposed to follow 8 days later, 7, 8 days later. And then the next day, because they only just got the visa, and they're going straight away.
And any of your friends that you had in Vienna growing up with,
can't remember.
You don't know what happened to them?
Can't remember. I remember all my cousins, quite a lot of cousins, and I was spoiled rotten because I was the youngest of them. But I can remember them. So we didn't really have any other friends besides me. We didn't live far away from here. I did have some friends actually, because I remember the one was called Ben, and he was in that photograph from the youth club with me. I can remember him. And I think that's about the only one I can remember. I was too young probably to understand what close friends are, a group of friends. At the age of 7 you don't have them. Then at age 14, 15 you got your friends, but not at the age of 7.
And how do you feel now, knowing that the Chancellor of Austria, Sebastian Kurz, that he's very, very pro-Israel? Austria today is one of the most pro-Israel European countries, together with the Czech Republic.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't happy, as I said, the first we went on a day trip to Vienna, because it brought back all the accents, and they brought and I speak, actually still speak German fluently. So when we came out of the airport, I've paid something, and the lady was giving me some change, and I said something in German. She said, "Oh, entschuldigt, ich habe nicht gewusst, dass du Deutsch sprichst. And she said, excuse me, I didn't know you were from here, and I spoke so fluently. And my daughter was amazed. But some of the people saying, after the war, if you had visitors, you stay at a hotel, and people came from the continent, from here, and you always used to wonder, what the hell were you doing during the war? Couldn't help it. I once stayed we went to Scotland, I remember, and we stayed at a hotel with a Jewish boarding house next door where we did all our eating, and except for keepers in the morning, and a couple there from Vienna, and I kept saying, what the hell is it? What do you think? What were they doing during the war? What? And you couldn't help him.
Did you ever go back after that day trip? Did you return to Vienna after that day trip?
After?
Did you ever go back again? Did you visit Vienna after that?
Yeah, I've been. I was there just before, a few years ago. I was only living here. 5 years, 6 years ago, perhaps. I took just my children, and we saw most of the Jewish places, obviously, with the Jewish Museum, the show. There was a group of Jewish people, so I was amazed. I couldn't believe how many Hasidim live in Vienna now. The place is swarming with them. I couldn't believe it. The street, there's a shop right opposite the hotel called Begadim, a clothes shop. Another shop called Purim, selling old fancy dresses. And there's quite a few kosher restaurants there now. It's a very beautiful city. We went down to all the places where we lived, and I didn't knock on any doors to say I used to live here. I wouldn't do that. And I don't know what I would have done if I was knocked on someone's door. I used to live here.
And you saw the brass, with the brass names that they put on the pavement. Yeah.
No, I don't.
Today there are many.
I didn't know that. No, not at that time.
Today in most places.
My family's name's up on the shul. In the shul there, they've got a list of people from Vienna who are there. Very nice shul, lovely shul.
And there's also by the Jewish Museum the Ozerua. There's and they've got a very big monument.
Yes, I know.
In the basically in the city centre.
And on Friday night they had a communal dinner. Must have been about 150 there, just near the shul. There's a kosher restaurant there. Have you ever been to Vienna? Yeah. And my highlight was when they came up to me and they said, "Would you make Kiddush?" Now, as you can gather, I haven't got a particularly good voice. Anyway, after Kiddush, a lady came to me, "Were you ever a chassan?" I tell you, that was the highlight of my trip. So, it's very interesting. We went to all the places I remembered, where we used to live. In fact, to show them where the hospitals were I was born. And okay. It had a very good Jewish community before the war. My father knew all about it. The very strong Hakoah football team, which was the best in the country. And had a team who should have been Olympic swimmers. They didn't allow them to go in. In fact, I saw a film recently where somebody brought this team. They made it here. They brought this team of 5 swimmers together who are now in the 80s and 90s, who were these swimmers who were going to be in the Olympics at the time. And they made a film about them, about the sports club, which has now been rebuilt upon the very fine sports centre there. And the school I went to is all in the same precinct there. And that's it.
And how do you feel that Austria is so pro-Israel today? It's one of the few countries in Europe that is very, very pro-Israel.
Not until recently.
But now it is. Now Austria is extremely pro-Israel with the Chancellor very, very pro-Israel, and the President of the Parliament is also extremely pro-Israel, pro-Jewish.
In Vienna, we didn't encounter any anti-Semitism. I don't think. The anti-Semitism is in all the small places in the country. Oh, but we still have the plays at Christmas, which were anti-Semitic. They still have them, and that's where I think most of the anti-Semitism is. In Vienna itself, I mean, I couldn't understand all these Hasidim being there. I didn't feel out of place. That way, I'm not a Catholic, but I didn't feel out of place there. And the Jewish club, and as a matter of fact, when we had our dinner, the two young boys, about 15, sitting near us, talking Ivrit. So I said to them, oh look, speak to them Ivrit. They're Israelis. Turned out they spoke Ivrit fluently. They learned it. They're locals. Two local boys that learned it, which was amazed me. They spoke it up quite fluently.
There's a very, very strong Jewish community there. Very strong. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So,
and Jacques, can I ask, what message can you give to your grandchildren and to the future generations? Because you had the great Mazal, the great Hashem put you on the last train to leave Vienna and you survived. But what...
It all happened in 1914, 1916. That's where it all... I always put it down to that. I feel all this will be shared.
Everything's beshed. It's meant to be. It's like preordained.
Yeah.
But what message do you give to the next generation? What message can you give?
What?
To your children and grandchildren, what message do you give?
Well, one of my grandsons here, when he was a little boy, when we told him this story, he was about 7 or 8, but Saba, where was your gun? I said, we have a gun. He said, my dad's got a gun underneath his bed. He was an officer in the army, his dad. So, I don't know. We tried to give them. I'm very pleased to say that I'm very proud of my own three children. One still in England, one lives in Kibbutz Bet Rimon, and one lives in Alamim. It's on the border of Gaza. It is on the border, not near Gaza, but a border. And you can overlook Gaza city. And they've all got families, they've all married very nicely, and we're quite proud of them. One's got 2 officers in the army, they're all colonels and majors, I think major. And they know what it's about. Not all the Israeli children know about the Holocaust. We were surprised about it. Sometimes when we met some children somewhere, they started talking maybe on holiday or somewhere, and they knew very little about it. They were surprised. My son is a teacher, and he's been to Poland about 10 times now with his classes when they go once every year. They're enjoying them. They're very happy here. What more can I tell them? They just remember who you are and where you came from. And that's, that's an old story. There's a big story about that. In England, they used to turn the signposts around in case of the invasion from the Nazis, and it would confuse them. So there's somebody said, how would you know if you wanted to come to one of these signposts and you lost your way? How would you know which way to go? So the answer is, if you know where you came from, and that's a big lesson in life, if you know where you came from, it will help you to go where you go.
It's a beautiful message.
It's true. That's I always start telling them, you remember who you are and who you were.
So I just want to thank you.
Come on then.
So Jacques, it's been such an honor and a privilege to. It's been a real honor and a privilege to reconnect and to hear your story and really to think that you were on the last train to leave Vienna. It's something unbelievable, and thank God you were, because thank God you survived.
Thank God my father been an officer and let me go
as well. Sure, and he didn't decide to do me. It's all Mina
I can remember it I must tell you, I remember that conversation very clearly. Absolutely. I'm also an officer in the army. As a one officer to another officer, I wish you the best of luck. Didn't shake hands, Heil Hitler.
Well, I want to thank you very much. It's it's been incredible hearing your life story, and just wish you Mazel Brocha and Mevesrim in good health till 120, and to just have nachas from your grandchildren.
Great-grandchildren.
And great-grandchildren.
You picked a good day, because this morning we had our 19th great-grandchild.
Wow, Mazel Tov.
During last night.
Mazel Tov. What a way to say it, Mazel Tov.
Yeah.
So, and you know, the best revenge for what happened is what you've just told me. This is the best revenge. So Am Yisrael Chai, and I think your beautiful message, if you know where you came from, you will know where you're going to.
That's that. And that's a big lesson to remember.
So thank you very, very much.
You're welcome.
It's been such a real honor and a privilege to be with you today, and I really, really am extremely grateful.
That's